Christine McVie died today in the hospital. Her family says she passed peacefully this morning. They did not say what caused her death. The singer-songwriter and keyboardist became a key part of Fleetwood Mac's success in the late 70s.
For nearly 5 months, the world only had 3 words to explain how Christine McVie died: a short illness. That was it. No details, no diagnosis, nothing beyond a gentle sentence in a family statement. Then a court filing tied to her estate cracked that story wide open, and what it revealed was so much more complicated than anyone imagined. Today we're going through exactly what that document said, what it means in plain English, and how it connects to a life that started with the unlikeliest surname in music history. Stay with me, because by the end of this you'll understand why her closest friends say a piece of them died with her. On November 30th, 2022, fans of Fleetwood Mac woke up to heartbreaking news. Christine McVie, the band's keyboardist and one of its most beloved voices, had died at 79. The statement released on behalf of her family was short and careful. It said she passed away peacefully in hospital that morning, surrounded by loved ones, following what they called a short illness. Fleetwood Mac itself posted a tribute calling her irreplaceable, saying there were no words to describe their sadness. For most people, that was the end of it. A private woman had died privately, and the details felt like something the family was entitled to keep close. Nobody pushed for more, because grief usually makes people want to respect a boundary rather than tear it down. Roughly 4 months later, in early April 2023, that boundary shifted, not because anyone leaked gossip, but because of ordinary legal process. Christine McVie's estate, reportedly worth more than $50 million, had to go through probate, and probate filings are public record. An entertainment outlet called The Blast reviewed those documents and found her official death certificate attached. What it listed was far more specific than a short illness. According to multiple outlets that later confirmed the same certificate, including Rolling Stone, Billboard, and People, her primary cause of death was recorded as a massive ischemic stroke. An ischemic stroke happens when blood flow to part of the brain gets blocked, usually by a clot, cutting off the oxygen that brain tissue needs to survive. Without that oxygen, brain cells begin to die within minutes, which is why ischemic strokes are one of the most common and most dangerous forms of stroke overall. But the certificate didn't stop there. It also listed several contributing conditions that painted a picture of a body under serious internal strain. There was bilateral renal infarction, meaning blood flow had been cut off to both kidneys at once. There was a large clot sitting inside one of the chambers of her heart, known as an atrial thrombus. And there was atrial fibrillation, an irregular heart rhythm that is well known in medicine for dramatically raising a person's risk of exactly the kind of stroke that ultimately took her life. Put together, this wasn't a single sudden event. It was several serious problems compounding on each other, likely over some period of time, until the body simply couldn't withstand it any longer. Here's the part that made headlines linger a little longer than a stroke alone might have. Listed as a secondary cause of death on that same certificate was a phrase that sounds almost like a puzzle: metastatic malignancy of unknown primary origin. In plain language, doctors had found cancer that had already spread through her body, but they were never able to pinpoint exactly where it started. This condition does have a recognized medical name: cancer of unknown primary, sometimes shortened to CUP, and oncologists consider it one of the more difficult diagnoses to manage. Health organizations estimate that only a small percentage of all cancer diagnoses fall into this category, and outcomes tend to be harder because treatment usually targets the original tumor, and here there wasn't one to target. To be clear, none of the reporting has specified exactly when this diagnosis was made or how it factored into her final days, only that it appeared on the certificate as a contributing cause. What we do know is that this detail added real weight to what had already been described publicly as declining health. Looking back, Christine McVie had actually told the public she wasn't doing well, just not in the way anyone understood at the time. In an interview with Rolling Stone published only months before she died, she said plainly that she was in quite bad health. She talked about a chronic back problem that made it difficult to stand at a piano the way she needed to for a live show, and she said she didn't think she was physically up for touring again. She reached for an old expression to sum it up: the mind is willing, but the flesh is weak. At the time, most fans read that as an artist gracefully acknowledging she was getting older. Nobody connected it to a stroke risk building in the background or a cancer without an obvious source. It's only in hindsight, with a death certificate now public, that those words read less like a soft admission and more like someone quietly telling us the truth as best she could. To understand why this loss hit so many people so hard, you have to go back to where Christine McVie actually started, because almost none of it points toward global stardom. She was born Christine and Perfect on July 12, 1943, in a small town in England's Lake District. Yes, Perfect was genuinely her birth surname, and she later joked to The Guardian that her teachers used to say they hoped she'd live up to it, adding with her dry sense of humor that she supposed she had been perfect right up until the day she got married. Her home life was unusual from the start. Her father, Cyril Perfect, was a classical violinist and music lecturer, and her grandfather had been an organist at Westminster Abbey, one of the most prestigious posts a British musician could hold. Her mother, meanwhile, worked as a psychic and faith healer, and by all accounts Christine genuinely believed in her mother's abilities. That upbringing, half rigorous classical discipline and half open belief in the unexplainable, would shape her in ways that showed up decades later in her songwriting. Christine trained formally on piano starting at age 4, the kind of strict, technical education you'd expect from a professional musician's daughter. She seemed destined for a quiet, respectable career, possibly teaching music. Then, as the story goes, her older brother left a Fats Domino songbook lying around the house, and something in her shifted the moment she started playing those loose, rolling boogie-woogie rhythms. She enrolled in art college to study sculpture, but she found herself pulled instead into England's booming blues scene of the 1960s. She joined a band called Chicken Shack as their keyboardist and vocalist, and her voice, low and unmistakably lived in, quickly stood out. Her 1969 cover of I'd Rather Go Blind became a genuine hit, and the era's leading music publication, Melody Maker, voted her best female vocalist 2 years running. She was already a respected name in British music before Fleetwood Mac ever entered the picture. Around this same period, Christine grew close to John McVie, the bass player in a rising blues outfit called Fleetwood Mac. They married in 1968. For a while, she supported the band from the sidelines rather than as an official member, contributing uncredited piano parts and even painting cover art for one of their early albums. That changed in 1970, when the band's founder and guitarist, Peter Green, abruptly departed amid struggles that weren't well understood at the time. With the group suddenly missing its anchor, they asked Christine to join officially. Drummer Mick Fleetwood would later describe her as the glue that held together a lineup full of talented, volatile personalities. It was a fitting description for someone who would go on to steady the band through some of its most turbulent years. The turning point that made Fleetwood Mac into a global phenomenon arrived on the last day of 1974, when American musicians Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks joined the lineup. Christine and Stevie's voices blended almost instantly, and the two women reportedly made an early pact to never be treated as anything less than equal partners in a band otherwise dominated by strong personalities. That friendship would become one of the defining relationships of both their lives. What followed next is one of the most well-documented ironies in music history. While recording what would become their landmark album, Rumors, nearly every relationship inside the band collapsed at once. Christine and John McVie divorced. Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham, who had also been a couple, split up. Mick Fleetwood's marriage was falling apart as well. And in the middle of all that personal wreckage, the band kept showing up to record together, channeling the fallout directly into the songs. Christine, in the thick of her own divorce, wrote some of the album's warmest and most hopeful material, including Don't Stop, a song about looking toward better days even while her marriage was ending in real time. She also wrote You Make Loving Fun, reportedly inspired by a relationship with the band's lighting director, while letting her then-husband believe the song was about their dog. One of her most celebrated songs, Songbird, reportedly came to her almost fully formed in the middle of the night. She said she woke with the entire melody in her head, sat at the piano, and worked it out in roughly half an hour, later describing the experience as feeling almost spiritual, a fitting echo of the household she grew up in. Mick Fleetwood has said publicly that he wants the song played at his own funeral one day. Rumors went on to sell tens of millions of copies worldwide, and Fleetwood Mac as a whole would move well over 100 million records across their career. That level of fame came with a lifestyle that took a real toll. Christine McVie was notably candid about this in later interviews, telling The Guardian bluntly that cocaine and champagne had been her vices during that period, and that she had, at one point, stayed awake for 3 days straight on a mix of the two before a frightening episode with her heart convinced her to stop entirely. She also spoke about a difficult relationship with Beach Boys musician Dennis Wilson, describing him as magnetic and chaotic in equal measure. Wilson drowned at age 39, a few years after their relationship ended. Beyond the substances and relationships, McVie also dealt with chronic back pain and, later in her career, a serious fear of flying that developed into a full-blown phobia by the late 1990s. In 1998, shortly after Fleetwood Mac was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, she made the surprising decision to leave the band entirely and retire from public life. Christine McVie spent the next 16 years largely out of the spotlight, settling into a historic Tudor manor house in Kent, England, and embracing the quiet countryside life she'd apparently longed for during years of touring. Her flying phobia was reportedly the main barrier keeping her from returning to the band, since global touring simply wasn't possible if she couldn't get on a plane. According to accounts she gave later, a therapist eventually suggested a direct approach. Book a flight to Hawaii, where Mick Fleetwood lived, and just do it. She did, and by her own description, the fear lifted the moment the plane left the ground. In 2014, after 16 years away, she rejoined Fleetwood Mac, reuniting the band's classic lineup for the first time in over a decade. It's worth remembering that Christine McVie's talent extended well beyond her role in Fleetwood Mac. Her 1984 solo album, simply titled Christine McVie, featured guest musicians including Eric Clapton and Steve Winwood, and produced the solo hit Got a Hold on Me, which reached the American Top 10. Over her career she was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, received Britain's Ivor Novello Award for Lifetime Achievement and a Brit Award for Outstanding Contribution to Music, and shared in the Grammy Award for Album of the Year that Rumours won. She remains one of the most accomplished songwriters to come out of the British music scene of her generation. Perhaps nothing captures what Christine McVie meant to the people around her more than her decades-long friendship with Stevie Nicks. The two called each other best friends for most of their adult lives, and Nicks has spoken openly about how close they remained even outside the band. When Christine's health declined suddenly at the end of 2022, reports indicate Stevie Nicks wanted to fly to be by her side but was told by the family that time was too short. Nicks later wrote a public tribute describing McVie as her best friend in the world. Lindsey Buckingham called her a musical comrade and a sister. Mick Fleetwood has spoken about the band's future without her feeling almost unthinkable, and Stevie Nicks has echoed that sentiment directly, essentially saying that without Christine, there is no more Fleetwood Mac to speak of. What makes Christine McVie's story resonate isn't just the medical details revealed after her death, even though those details were more complicated than the public initially knew. It's the contrast between how private she stayed throughout her life and how much she quietly shaped one of the most famous bands in music history. She wrote some of Fleetwood Mac's warmest, most comforting songs during periods of real personal turmoil, and she gave interviews hinting at declining health without ever fully revealing what she was facing. The court filing that became public in 2023 didn't uncover a scandal. It uncovered the medical reality behind a life that had always been more guarded than the fame around it suggested. Christine McVie passed away doing what she'd spent much of her life doing quietly and without fanfare, carrying more than the people around her fully understood. Her music, though, made sure that generations of listeners would carry a piece of her with them long after the headlines faded. What's the Christine McVie song that means the most to you, and when did you first hear it? Let us know in the comments.